Some are born into love, others into war. He was thrown into a battle before he could even walk. From a young age, he knew the world as a merciless place, burdened by weights on his tiny shoulders. It was as if he'd been born into a war, the battle between his own parents. Drowning in their mutual hatred, they abandoned him, a defenseless sapling caught in the crossfire. When they decided to separate, they didn't want him either, as if wanting to be rid of some old possession. In fact, his father, with a heart darkened by malice, disowned him. That child, barely understanding what life was paying the cruelest price for his parents' relentless animosity. All he needed was love, compassion, and a home. For a time, he found refuge with his aunt, his mother's sister. But that place wasn't a safe harbor either, but a temporary shelter sought while escaping the storm. Though his aunt tried to treat him well, she was drowning in her own problems and financial difficulties, and having to care for him only wore her down further. The child felt that weary look in his aunt's eyes, that he was unwanted, a burden. This left deep wounds within him, further solidifying his sense of loneliness. But he refused to give up. He had to cling to life, to stand on his own 2 feet. To survive, he had to be strong. He had to grow up. Childhood had ended for him long, before it should have. In those days when hope was exhausted, when despair seeped into his very bones, he found a farm. It was a quiet and peaceful place, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. There, he began to live a life surrounded by animals, working the land. He would wake with the first light of dawn to feed the animals, water the fields, and run around, doing farm chores. He would get tired and weary by the end of the day, but this weariness had meaning for him. Because working meant clinging to life, his greatest desire was to go to school, to read and learn. But that farm was like a prison for him, and his dreams of reading were like unattainable stars. Yet, he never lost hope. Every day, he would pass by the school on the road from the farm to the city. From afar, he would listen to the cheerful sounds of children wafting through the windows and sigh. Perhaps a teacher would notice him. Perhaps a miracle would happen. With that hope, he walked the same road every day with the help of an old man who worked on the farm and knew how to read and write. He secretly began to learn the alphabet. The old man taught him in secret, and in return, he helped the old man with his chores. These clandestine lessons were a beacon of hope for him. One day, while passing by the school, a teacher he had never seen before called him over. The teacher's face showed compassion, and her eyes were filled with curiosity. The teacher listened to his story, his loneliness, his helplessness, his desire to learn. The teacher wanted to help him. She became aware of his situation, and from that moment on, his life began to change. The teacher tried to send him back to his family. Perhaps his family would take care of him, would love him. However, as fate would have it, his mother took him in, but her only goal was to take the money he earned. His mother saw him as a tool, a source of income. The boy couldn't bear to stay in that dark, loveless, and cruel environment any longer. His mother's interest in him was nothing more than an interest in his money. That lack of love, that greed, wounded him deeply. One night, he quietly ran away from home without telling anyone. He didn't know anyone in the city. He was alone, helpless, afraid. He was only 11 years old, and no one would give him a job. The streets became his home, and the stars became his companions. At night, he would sleep in a public restroom in a cold and dirty corner. To earn a few coins to feed himself, he sold lighters that he found. He was shivering from the cold, exhausted from hunger. But he tried not to lose hope, not to lose sight of his dreams. Living in these difficult conditions was unbearable for him, but he refused to give up. He continued to fight. He had to fight to survive. He had to be strong. One day, while walking down the street, a compassionate restaurant owner noticed him and offered him a job. He began washing dishes in the restaurant. At first, it was difficult. His hands became wrinkled from being in the water all day, and the smell of detergent burned his throat. But he didn't complain, because this job had opened a door of hope for him. His hands, lost among the piles of dirty dishes, were nurturing his dreams for the future. With every dish he washed, he felt that he was one step closer to his dreams. He needed a place to stay. The restaurant owner prepared a small space for him in the basement. That basement was more valuable to him than any palace. He was able to protect himself from the cold, and he was able to sleep comfortably. He was safe, warm, and at peace. That basement became his shelter, his home. He was fascinated by the foreigners who came to the restaurant from different countries and different cities. Their different languages, their different cultures, their different lives. He had discovered a new world. He would listen to their conversations, observe their style of dress, and wonder about their lives. These foreigners had opened the doors to a whole new world for him. He decided to learn their language and go to England. England meant hope, a dream, a path to salvation for him. He asked one of the restaurant's customers to teach him English. Learning English meant a ticket to England for him. He studied English with great excitement 2 days a week. He was promoted from dishwasher to waiter. Now he was able to interact directly with customers and earn tips. Being a waiter meant a new beginning, new hope for him. Years passed quickly. That boy grew, developed, and matured. When he turned 18, he reached one of the turning points in his life. He had to make a decision. Either he could postpone his dreams and live a normal life, or he could chase after his dreams. He made a decision and joined the army. The military taught him discipline, responsibility, patriotism, and how to face difficulties. The military was like a school that prepared him for life. After returning from the army, he wanted to conform to society, to build a home. He got married. However, his marriage didn't bring him happiness. He couldn't get along with his wife, and they were constantly arguing. They had different dreams, different expectations. This marriage had been a disappointment, a regret for him. Finally, they decided that separation was the best decision for both of them. To achieve his dreams, he had to leave the past behind. He decided to go to England. This decision meant a turning point, a new beginning for him. He had saved all his money. With that money, which he had earned by toiling for years, he bought a plane ticket and went to London. England was the beginning of a hopeful journey for him. The 4 years he spent in London were both an adaptation process and a time of preparation for the future. On the one hand, he was earning a living as a waiter in a restaurant, and on the other hand, he was going to courses at night to improve his English. The chaos of London, the way different cultures lived together, frightened him a bit at first. But over time, he got used to this diversity and even began to enjoy it. Visa procedures were one of the most difficult issues for him when he first came to England. The constantly delayed appointments, the never-ending paperwork, the fear of visa application rejection. All of this put great pressure on him, but he didn't give up. He submitted his applications more carefully each time and finally managed to solve the visa problem. The language barrier was also an important obstacle to overcome. At first, he had difficulty understanding the English accent and expressing himself, but every day, he tried to talk to customers, continued to attend language courses, and tried to improve his language by watching English movies and listening to English music. His job at the restaurant was both a school and a source of livelihood for him. There, he met different people, learned English cuisine, and gained information about restaurant management. The restaurant owner was very helpful to him. He supported him. He even encouraged him to open his own restaurant one day. It was at that restaurant that he met a person who would change his life. John. John was a young, dynamic, and entrepreneurial Englishman. They both had the same dreams: to start their own business, to be successful, and to leave a mark on the world. One day, while chatting with John during a busy evening at the restaurant, he told him about his dream of opening his own restaurant. John was very receptive to this idea. He even told him that he could help him with this. It was at that moment that the foundations of one of the most important partnerships of his life were laid. The idea of partnership seemed very exciting at first, but once they got into it, they faced many difficulties. First of all, they had to find the capital needed to open a restaurant. Neither of them had much money. John managed to borrow money from his family. He, on the other hand, put in all the money he had saved for years. But that money wasn't enough either. They tried to get loans from banks, but their loan applications were rejected. There were times when they despaired, but they supported each other and motivated each other. Finally, they managed to find a small investor. Finding a suitable place for the restaurant was also quite difficult. Rents were very high in London. Also, the location of the restaurant was very important. It had to be in a busy street, in an easily accessible place. They walked street by street for weeks. They looked at many places, but either the rent was too high or the location was not suitable. Just as they were about to lose hope, they found a small old shop in a secluded street on the outskirts of the city. Although the location of the shop worried them at first, they were attracted by the reasonable rent and the potential of the shop. The concept of the restaurant was also born after long discussions. They wanted to do something unique and innovative that wasn't available elsewhere. Finally, they decided to open a restaurant where customers determined the price of the food they ate. This idea was both very risky and very exciting. They didn't know how people would react to this idea, but there was no harm in trying. When the opening day of the restaurant came, they were both very excited. All the preparations had been completed. The restaurant was decorated with colorful lights, and the tables were carefully arranged. The menu featured dishes from different countries. But what attracted the most attention was that the price section had been left blank. When the doors of the restaurant opened that day, people began to fill the place with curious eyes. At first, everyone was surprised. Customers were eating their meals, and then they were deciding how much to pay themselves. Some were paying what the meal was worth, while others were paying very little. But overall, people liked this concept. The first few days were very difficult. The income wasn't enough to cover the expenses. Far from making money, they were in danger of going bankrupt. They were discouraged, and they despaired. Had they made the wrong decision? Would this business end in bankruptcy? But they supported each other. They motivated each other again. They decided to work harder, to try harder. They started advertising the restaurant. They actively used social media. They distributed brochures. They placed advertisements in newspapers. They were taking care of the customers individually. They were listening to their requests. They were taking their criticisms into account. Over time, the restaurant's name began to spread. People were curious about this unusual concept and flocked to the restaurant. As the number of customers increased, so did the income. The restaurant quickly became one of the most popular places in the city. Tourists were especially curious about this restaurant. They were coming here to take photos and share them on social media. That boy had finally achieved his dreams. He had escaped from poverty, misery, and loneliness, and had become a successful businessman. Instead of spending the money he earned on luxury cars and expensive clothes, he was spending it on the education of his employees. He was giving them scholarships, sending them to courses, and helping them advance in their careers. Because he believed that education could change a person's life, he also founded a foundation to help young children. He was covering their educational expenses, meeting their housing needs, and illuminating their futures. Because he believed that children should start life on an equal footing. He was an exemplary person who had managed to overcome the difficulties of life to achieve his dreams. He was telling his own story to give hope, to inspire others. That boy was now a hero. His story was the victory of perseverance, hard work, and hope. He had never given up. He had chased his dreams, and he had finally succeeded. His life was a success story that would be an example to everyone. He was once just a boy looking through a school window, longing to learn. Now, he was the one opening doors for those who had none.